Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for those of you in Washington, D.C. for coming here, and for those of you on the phone for joining us. Let me start, as I have in the past, by giving you an update on the count and where we are. Again, all of these numbers will be as of close of business last night. The margin at the end of counting last night is 50 votes, with roughly 200,000 ballots yet to be counted. Al Franken has gained 165 votes during the recount so far. Now, let me explain to you why this number may be different from the margin reported in the newspaper, or that some of you have been tracking at home. The number I just gave you, the 50 votes, is the most accurate way to track where things stand in the recount, for several reasons. Number one, the Secretary of State's numbers, which is where most everything else is derived off of, are as of 8 p.m. the previous evening. We have observers at every counting location and at every counting table. So we are able to give you results not just through 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., which is when they call in the results to the Secretary of State and they get posted, but rather through the end of counting each night. So that's why each night we have always said that there is more counted, a higher percentage counted than what the Secretary of State's website shows. Most importantly, the Secretary of State's numbers, the numbers on the website, take every challenge ballot out of the candidate's count and adds it to the challenge pile. In other words, the Secretary of State's number assumes that every challenge is meritorious. Now, it is clear, and in fact a number of publications have posted some of these challenges from both sides on their websites, that this is not the case. The number we track internally, which is the number I've given you, relies on the call of the nonpartisan election judge at the table before any challenge is lodged. So, if the judge calls it for Franken, we track it as a Franken ballot. To answer a question that will no doubt come. If a judge calls it for Coleman, we treat it as a Coleman ballot even though we have challenged it. So, you basically have a choice. You can either track it and assume that every challenge is meritorious. Okay, a dubious proposition for those of you who have looked on the website and seen some of these challenges. Or you can assume none of the challenges on either side of any ballot is meritorious, and that the nonpartisan election official sitting at the table who said Coleman or Franken was in fact correct. Now, we know that the Coleman campaign has challenged far more Franken ballots than Franken's campaign, than our campaign has challenged Coleman ballots. The margin in the differential of challenges is about 300. Now, you will notice a certain symmetry here. This is not a coincidence. The reason why there is a gap of about 344 between what's on the Secretary of State's website and the number I gave you is because the Coleman campaign is simply driving down the Franken number by simply issuing more challenges. If I wanted your newspapers to all write that we were winning by 1 million votes, think about that. We were winning by 1 million votes in the recount. All I would have to do is tell my people to challenge 1 million ballots. And then the Secretary of State's website would take that 1 million ballots out of the Coleman pile, put it into the challenge pile, and then it would look like we were winning by 1 million votes under that methodology. It's nonsensical because at the end of the day, the count is what the count is, and there's no point in us running up a bunch of frivolous challenges the way the Coleman campaign seems to think that there is a value to. So the 50-vote margin, which I give you, assumes that the call at the table is correct. That is, the decision pre-challenge by the election official as to whether this is a Coleman ballot, a Franken ballot, or an other ballot is correct. Now, that said, we're confident that we are going to gain votes when the challenges are resolved, because our analysis is that our challenges are of a higher quality. However, that is a subjective judgment, and one that other people can disagree with, and you all don't have to accept at face value. So for purposes of calculating the vote margin, we start from the standpoint that the call of the election judge at the table was correct and will be ultimately upheld, even though we believe that we will net votes there. And if you take that methodology without any subjective guess as to whose challenges are more meritorious or less meritorious, the margin as of close of counting yesterday stands at 50. Now,
in Franken's favor.
No, we are down 50.
Down 50.
Okay? Which is why I said we've gained 165 votes. Started at 215, gained 165. But let me take a step back, because we are in the middle of a long process to determine the winner of this election. The statewide canvass was a step in that process. The post-election machine audits was another step in that process. The hand count currently underway is yet another step in that process. The state canvassing board's review of the challenge ballots will be another step in that process. But I want to make a point today that I have made over and over again, because it is so important, which is that this process will not be complete until every vote has been fairly and accurately counted. And as I am here before you today, there are votes, unquestionably legal votes, cast by Minnesota voters, that have not been counted and as of yet are not being counted. To be specific, there are two categories that we have raised concerns about. Number one, there are still remaining missing ballots. According to the Secretary of State's website, and again, this is not our internal data, but this is official verifiable data from the Secretary of State, there are numerous instances where the number of recorded voters does not equal the number of ballots counted in the recount. That means ballots were counted on Election Day, but are not included in the recount. Instances of missing ballots have occurred in St. Paul, Duluth, Coon Rapids, Hermantown, Crystal, Hopkins, and in other places. And yesterday I went through a list of specific precincts to give you a sense of what numbers are at issue there. We have been investigating these instances as we become aware of them and have determined that even if you set aside disparities resulting from clerical or technical errors, as many as several hundred ballots could be missing. Yesterday, after I spoke to the press, we received a letter from the Secretary of State's office in response to a letter that we sent them on November 24th expressing our concern about the discrepancies in the vote totals. The Secretary of State has responded to let us know that, in fact, his office is directing all counties and cities to search for missing ballots. In Hennepin County, we had raised concerns about ballots remaining uncounted in ballot boxes. Some of you may remember there was a photo that we put up for display showing an apparent ballot or so, or a few ballots sticking out of the bottom of a voting machine ballot box. And we are happy to report that the county has now agreed to open boxes in those precincts with missing ballots to ensure that all ballots are counted. Many other counties and cities are also in the process of looking for these missing ballots, for which we thank them and we thank the Secretary of State for his helpful instruction to the county. Unfortunately, there remain other counties that have still not chosen to undertake this very important task, and we renew our call on them to do so. We thank the Secretary of State for directing that all counties do so and look forward to continuing to work with his office and each county on finding these missing ballots. Now, to what is emerging as probably the most significant issue before us and the state of Minnesota regarding this recount, and that is the disposition of improperly rejected absentee ballots. Here's what we know. Yesterday we told you that we had received lists from all but 9 counties that included well over 9,000 absentee ballots that were rejected, not counted, and set aside. Since yesterday, we've received lists from 5 more counties, and the number of rejected absentee ballots has grown to at least 9,267 ballots. As of 11 a.m. this morning, there are 4 counties outstanding that have not yet provided full information to us regarding their rejected absentee ballots. Those 4 counties are Carlton, Dakota, Freeborn, and St. Louis, though we have received partial data from St. Louis. We are hopeful that we will receive the bulk of this data by the end of today, but we are prepared to exercise every option in order to obtain it. Those of you in Minnesota know this. For those of you in D.C. who may not have followed this as closely, We earlier in this process sued Ramsey County over its failure to give us this data. That had a jarring effect. It both jarred loose the data from Ramsey County when we prevailed, and also has now helped convince most of the remaining counties that we are entitled to this data. And this data, so that you're clear, is a list of whose absentee ballots were rejected and the reason for the rejection. What becomes clear when you look at the reasons for the rejection is that there are many, many Minnesotans who cast lawful absentee ballots who, due to no fault of their own, had those ballots rejected, typically for administrative error or for some other reason. Last Wednesday, the Secretary of State estimated that 500 of these rejected absentees were rejected improperly. So though we're talking about a big universe of rejected absentee ballots, we have said all along that the vast majority of the 12,000 were rejected properly for good reason. They were rejected. It may be because the person voted in person or the person was not entitled to vote. So the vast majority of the 12,000 were rejected properly, but there remains a significant number of them which were rejected improperly. Last Wednesday, the Secretary of State estimated that at 500. We estimated, based on our look of, albeit still incomplete data, to be as many as 1,000. In other words, these were legal voters who cast lawful ballots that should have been counted, and that must be counted if we are to have a result that we can say fairly and accurately counted every vote. At the State Canvassing Board meeting last week, members of the State Canvassing Board joined our concern that improper rejection of absentee ballots amounted to the disenfranchisement of Minnesotans. And they suggested that one step that could be taken in the direction of alleviating that problem would be to sort rejected absentee ballots into 5 categories or piles. You will sometimes hear these referred to as the 5 piles. One for each of the legal reasons for rejecting absentee ballots, and a 5th pile for ballots that were not rejected for any of the 4 legal reasons. The 4 legal reasons, just so you all know, are as follows. This is from the Minnesota law. I didn't make this up. This is how the Minnesota law defines the 4 reasons for rejecting absentee ballots. Number 1, the ballot was rejected because the voter's name and address on the return envelope are not the same as the information provided on the absentee ballot application. Number 2, the voter's signature on the return envelope is not the genuine signature of the individual who made the application for the ballot, and the signature is required under applicable Minnesota law, or the certificate has not been completed as prescribed in the directions for casting an absentee ballot. Number 3, the voter was not registered and eligible to vote in the precinct or has not included a properly completed voter registration application. Elections personnel shall use available voter rosters to determine whether the voters were registered. And number 4, the voter had already voted at the election, either in person or by absentee ballot. Elections personnel shall use available voter rosters to determine whether the voter had already voted. According to Minnesota state law, if a ballot cannot be placed into one of those 4 piles, it cannot legally be rejected. Today, we received copies of a communication sent from the Secretary of State's office to the county auditors and to the county and city election officials. That communication directs local elections officials to re-review rejected absentee ballots and sort them into those 5 piles, the 4 reasons that are legitimately rejected and the 5th pile. We are grateful that the Secretary of State and the State Canvassing Board agree with our assertion that properly cast absentee ballots cannot remain uncounted, and we are thankful in advance for the work of local elections officials to review and sort these ballots. I am sure we'll have more to say on this new development as that process unfolds. In the end, I want to say again what we believe to be at the core of what we are doing. Every vote legally cast should and must be counted. Whether that happens at the county level, at the canvassing board, in the courts, before the United States Senate, we are more confident than ever that these legally cast ballots will, in fact, be counted. Minnesotans will ultimately be rewarded for their patience with a count that includes all the votes and an election result they can trust to reflect the will of everyone who cast a lawful vote.